Today was a special day, one of the most important days in every woman's life. It was one of those most joyful moments filled with hope for happy changes and confidence in a happy future. The one that is remembered forever, the day of discharge from the maternity hospital. It seems that now everything will be different. A woman returns home in a completely different status. It is simply an amazing, inexplicable feeling associated with the birth of a new person. Just a few days ago, exhausted, weighed down by a huge belly and tired of her own clumsiness, the pregnant woman arrived at the hospital. Then the labor itself, filled with pain and agony, through which every mother goes through in the name of the great mission, the continuation of life on our planet. And here she is, already quite rested and inspired by happy fantasies, forgetting all about her recent sufferings and confident that all the hardest things are behind her, ready to return home with her firstborn, a small child in her arms. Agnes is twice as lucky. She has two such fortunes, for she carried and gave birth to twins. The first rays of the sun were just peeking through the hospital window. Agnes is already awake. Emotions overflowed her from inside, not allowing her to lie in bed for a couple of hours. Outside the window is a beautiful sunrise, the weather is perfect for her mood, she is happy and hopeful. Healthy babies are sleeping in cribs nearby. Nothing can break the general idyll. A young mother bent over her children to admire her babies once again. Little pink lips, doll hands. The soul fills with warmth at the mere sight of them. "My kin," Mommy whispers enthusiastically, catching her breath. My God, how much she had gone through before they could be born. How much she waited and hoped, how many hospitals she visited, how many courses of treatment she underwent. And what moral and physical strain it all cost her. The relationship with her husband became very bad, and with her mother-in-law it was even worse. She disliked Agnes from the very first day of their acquaintance and was categorically against the wedding of her son. She believed that he could find a better partner. And when the problems with conceiving a child were discovered, so she stopped hiding her dislike and was no longer shy, allowing herself the harshest statements. "Well, why are we so unlucky? So many girls around, but it was us who got the worst one. Not only is she poor, but she's also infertile," the woman gloated. Agnes was hurt and offended by these cruel words. Is it her fault that she can't get pregnant? She wants children. Very much. Despite this obviously unfair treatment, the mother-in-law had to keep quiet often to keep the family balanced. Most of all, the young wife hated scandals and quarrels. She believed that in the house should reign calm, mutual understanding and love. For the sake of this she was ready to sacrifice her own ambitions and ego. For as long as she could remember, she and her mother had lived like that. Agnes did not know her father at all and had never seen him. It was only known that he left the family when she was very young. Her mother decided to devote her life to raising her daughter. Of course, the salary of an ordinary accountant of the city enterprise was disastrously insufficient. Had to live more than just modestly, constantly deny themselves everything, wear the cheapest clothes, eat the simplest food. But her mother was one of those cheerful optimists enthusiasts who could even serve buckwheat porridge as in a real restaurant. "Look here, it's a volcano," she would broadcast in a mysterious tone as she piled the hot, steaming porridge into a mound to the girl, who watched her actions mesmerized, "and this is burning lava," she would continue the game, placing a piece of butter on top, "hurry up and save everyone from the disaster." Little Agnes laughed merrily as she gobbled up this fabulous dish, which seemed to be the most delicious thing in the world. Plus, in literally an hour, her mom could make a new outfit out of her dress for her daughter. Good thing she had gotten a wonderful sewing machine from her grandmother. But the main thing that managed to create was that atmosphere of general peace in the house. Everyone helped each other, no one ever raised his voice. Disagreements were solved calmly and peacefully. This model of behavior seemed to Agnes the most correct and comfortable. After graduating from high school the girl entered the university at the Faculty of Economics, and the cheerful student life spun her in its restless dance. Study, new friends, new interests, parties, and her first and greatest love, tall athlete John. Just from looking at the stately young man the girl's heart sank for a moment, and he, strangely enough, answered her with mutual sympathy. Good manners and beautiful courtship finally conquered the best student of the course. Having married her daughter to a young promising man from a rich family, her mother finally decided to think about herself. She met an elderly foreigner on the internet and went abroad to live with him. After seeing her mom off and being genuinely happy for her, Agnes now focused entirely on her family. It was she who persuaded her husband to take a risk and, together with a few investors, set up a commercial bank. It was she who wrote most of the business plan and developed her own strategy for the rapid market entry of the new financial institution. True, all her merits were quickly forgotten and ignored. The bank began to give an impressive income. Her husband immediately took over the management, convincing his wife that it was important for him to be met from work by a hot lunch and a loving and well-groomed wife. Agnes was a little disappointed by the suspension, but the positive outcome was still more important. After becoming a housewife, Agnes seriously considered having a child. This is where an unpleasant discovery awaited her. After several years of going to clinics and medical centers, the couple decided to go for IVF. Fortunately, they had no material problems now. Skeptical mother-in-law and here did not miss the opportunity to express her opinion. From such a negligent daughter-in-law only one loss and no benefit. I hope that at least for this kind of money you can give birth to an heir. After such words, Agnes could only sigh heavily, barely suppressing a lump of resentment and indignation in her throat. And why her mother-in-law sees only faults in her and does not want to recognize her merits. After all, she's the reason why John's business is doing so well. Maybe she wasn't so terrible. The girl pushed the unpleasant thoughts away from her. No, now she wanted to think only about the upcoming surgery and believe that everything would be all right. Lord, make it all right, she whispered, looking up at the sky. And the miracle happened. Everything worked the first time. 2 embryos successfully took root with Agnes, but the doctors advised the future mom to be under constant medical supervision. She did not want to take any risks, and for the sake of her future children the young woman was ready to do anything, even if she had to lie down for the whole pregnancy without moving. So Agnes had to spend several months in the hospital. John at first often came to visit his bored wife, but over time, according to him, he had some difficulties at work, requiring his constant presence, and their communication was reduced to a daily evening call. Her husband deliberately did not tell her about work problems, justifying his decision by saying that a pregnant wife should never worry. But he assured her that the situation was manageable and that he could easily handle it. Agnes did not blame her spouse for this. Well, how could she not? After all, he takes care of her so she doesn't worry for nothing. Plus, he makes money for their family. Commercial banking is no joke. It requires constant supervision, business meetings, business trips. There are always minor problems that arise. She has faith in John. He can solve everything. When, finally, the long-awaited twins Eva and Paul were born, the names for which had long ago been thought up, all the previous worries and anxieties instantly disappeared. John was genuinely happy about the birth of the children, but he came only once during the week, the day after the birth. He looked nervous and depressed. Agnes justified this behavior with problems at work. Well, she'd help him figure it out. She had an honors degree in economics for a reason. And today, finally, the long-awaited day came when Agnes would return home. She was terribly tired of these pale hospital walls, which she had been forced to look at for the last months. She wanted to come to her favorite sunny bedroom as soon as possible. Next to it she had long ago, even before her pregnancy, organized a children's room, in which she herself had chosen a cute wallpaper with bears and bunnies. At last this room would be filled with children's laughter. Of course, she realized that now there would be more worries, and enough, but they would be pleasant worries. How many times she had imagined how she would live after childbirth. To take care of, feed, bathe the children, wait for her husband from work. What else does an ordinary woman need to be happy? Agnes jumped out of bed once again this morning and looked out of the window with impatience. There he was, finally. Her husband's car slowly pulled into the parking lot. Agnes waved happily from the window, making signs, hoping that he would look up and see her, but John was extremely focused and quickly disappeared under the main entrance canopy. There, now the little ones could be picked up. Eva and Paul grumbled and cried reluctantly. Grudgingly, reacting to her attempts to dress them. They were so small and seemed unusually fragile, it was scary to even touch them. Hush, hush, my good ones. Our daddy is here. Now we are going home. You'll be fine at home, the woman said affectionately. But at the sight of her husband appearing on the doorstep, the old anxiety suddenly returned, hanging in the air as an invisible dense cloud. The tension and concern in the expression of John's face were immediately apparent. His jaws clenched tightly, probably to avoid saying anything unnecessary. His gaze was restless, running. Entering the room, her husband somehow absolutely cold, almost formally, kissed the young mother on the cheek on the way. And immediately ran to the window, searching for someone there with his eyes. He was obviously very excited about something. "Well, are you ready?" he asked, turning to his wife, and immediately hurried away, "Let's go quickly." And the look is so foreign, Agnes thought, "Okay, I'll talk to him at home. I'll try to find out what's bothering him so much." All the while nervously looking around, putting his family in the back seat of his car, the man literally jumped into the driver's seat and drove off in a hurry. "John, be careful," the spouse couldn't stand it, nearly dropping the children from her arms. "What's wrong with you today?" "Sorry, Agnes," came from the driver's seat. Her husband's condition was becoming more and more worrisome. No, she wouldn't make it home. Need to find out right now. "Honey, what's wrong? What's wrong with you? Can you finally explain to me?" The husband was silent at first, then sighed heavily, slowed down, pulling over to the side of the road and turned to his wife. His gaze expressed intense worry. "Agnes, you just don't worry," he began, hesitating for a moment. All at once everything in her soul literally shivered, in premonition of something terrible. "The fact is, I'm in big trouble. Things are really bad. I even have to go into hiding. The raiders want to take away my part in the bank. They are constantly harassing me, calling me with threats, trying to force me to rewrite the share to them. All in all, the situation is out of control." "But how is that possible?" retorted the wife vehemently. "We must go to the police at once. Let them deal with them." You think I haven't applied?" John shifted his eyebrows and shook his head with a frown. "They paid the police long ago, so they pay no attention to me. Won't even take a statement. They say there's no crime." Agnes had obviously not counted on such an answer. If even the police refused to help, who are these scary people? If it was about the internal problems of the bank, she would quickly think of a way to fix the situation. "So what do we do now?" the young woman asked in utter confusion. John reached to her palm, squeezed it firmly, and spoke in an ingratiating voice. "I have an idea. But understand, my dear, in such a critical situation, I have no right to risk my family. After all, these people are capable of anything," the man said and looked meaningfully straight into her eyes. That look made the young mom uncomfortable. "I want to hide you away until this is resolved. I've been promised to help." Agnes looked at him in surprise. "And where? Where do you want to hide us?" "I found a cabin in the village," the man replied. "They won't find you there for sure. We'll go there right away. You'll live in nature for a while. It's even good." "A cabin? In the village?" the wife interposed in astonishment, and clasped her hands over her face. "John, how do you imagine it? After all, the children are very young, I'm alone. What if something happens?" "Don't worry about that, I'll be visiting, or I'll send someone to you in case of an emergency. Don't worry, everything will be fine," he assured me. With those words, the man turned the ignition key in the lock again and started the engine to drive on, towards the exit of the city. It was useless to continue arguing with him. Dreams of a long-awaited homecoming were shattered. All the way Agnes was silent, thinking hard about the situation. On the one hand, she was obliged to support her husband in hard times, but on the other hand, was it the right decision? If he had consulted her beforehand, perhaps she would have come up with a better solution, but he didn't want to worry her, so he delayed until the last minute. The mysterious disappearance of her mother-in-law from her life was also disconcerting. Only now Agnes realized that she had not even congratulated her on the birth of her children. Maybe John hid her somewhere too. The car suddenly turned and drove off the highway, and the road was immediately covered with potholes of different sizes, and then turned into bumps, where almost every second it was necessary to slow down, otherwise you could be left without a bumper. My God, what could be at the end of this road? It's scary to even imagine. Unpleasant premonitions were fully justified. From behind a hill a small village appeared, situated near the forest. The roofs, pale from time, were scattered chaotically among the dense greenery. Up close, the village seemed abandoned. Many houses were boarded up. Even the paths to them were overgrown with thick grass. Finally, the car stopped smoothly. Agnes could see the old hedge through the car window. Hidden in the overgrown garden, the cottage did not look pleasant either. A sigh of disappointment escaped from the woman's breast. "Good heavens, John," said Agnes quietly, afraid of waking the twins, "where have you brought us? Are there any people around here? Or am I the only one in the whole neighborhood?" she asked in dismay. As if in answer to her question, an elderly thin woman, with a white kerchief tied over her gray hair, came out of a neighboring yard. "Hello, John. Have you decided to come after all?" she asked as she came closer. Apparently they'd met when he was looking for a temporary shelter for his family. The man replied vaguely, pulling a bag of belongings out of the trunk. "I'm your neighbor Jane," she introduced herself good-naturedly to a young woman looking around the area with confusion. "Agnes," she replied in a trembling voice. "Oh. Your babies are quite small," Jane rejoiced as she peered into the interior of the car. In another situation Agnes would have shared the joy of a woman she did not know well. A couple of hours ago she had been ready to shout to the whole world about her babies, to tell with enthusiasm about the happy pregnancy and the first days of her children's life, but now she did not feel like socializing at all. The mood was not right. The new neighbor confined herself to a brief phrase. "Yes, we've just come from the hospital." John approached, giving his spouse a hand to help her out of the car. "There you go," the spouse rejoiced, "you have company. It won't be boring for sure. And I have to get back." He handed her the babies in her hands, without even asking if she could hold them both at the same time. Agnes was completely confused by his actions and words. She frantically clung to the children, looking at her husband with eyes full of tears. However, he didn't notice or didn't want to notice her condition. He only gave his wife and sleeping children a quick kiss and got behind the wheel to drive away as quickly as possible. "John," his wife cried out in despair, "you at least leave me some money. There's not much of it. When are you coming?" "I'll call you later," he muttered, handing her some large bills, and drove back into town. Agnes stood there, holding the children in her arms with difficulty, staring after her unfeeling husband, who had left her in the middle of the road. Her chest tightened, and tears were about to flow from her eyes. Her attention was diverted by Paul's yawn. No, she had to stop being sad immediately. She was responsible for 2 more human lives. Agnes looked suspiciously at the car, which had left a puff of dust behind it, and came closer. "Why didn't your husband stay behind?" "He left so quickly," Jane inquired. "He's in big trouble at work," Agnes replied evasively, "he needs to be in town all the time." The neighbor stepped closer and held out her hands with determination. "Let me give you a hand. It's hard for you on your own, and I'm a paramedic by trade after all," even though I've been retired for a long time. Thank you so much, the young mother thanked. She sighed heavily and went to the house, to study and master her dwelling. The inside of the house didn't look much better than the outside, everything was covered in dust. The paint on the floor and doors had peeled off, exposing the previous layers. A general cleaning was urgently needed. Luckily, the babies were not cranky. After eating, they fell asleep almost immediately. God, what is waiting for us here? I've never lived in the village before, the young woman's mind flashed. It was as if the neighbor had read her thoughts. Don't be afraid, I'll help you as much as I can, she said in a sincere voice and added with a slight chuckle, it's not as scary as it seems at first glance. I used to live in the city myself, and now I don't want to go anywhere from here, although my children have been urging me to move in with them for years. Well, no, thought Agnes, that's not me. What's good here? I'll never get used to the village. Almost tonight the two of them and Jane cleaned the house, but even the frequency and relative order brought Agnes little satisfaction. All the new and unpleasant discoveries, and the peculiarities of life in the countryside, acted on her not too positively. No sewerage, no toilet outside. It was lucky that at least the well was near the yard. Having dragged buckets of water all day, by nightfall the exhausted woman fell on a chair, cursing everything. Her whole body ached. Jane looked much better, as if she hadn't labored all day. She brought some food from home to treat her new neighbor, and made tea with some aromatic herbs. It made her feel a little better, but her inner tension never let up. Her soul was also restless. In the evening her husband called her to ask how his favorite woman and children were settling in at the new place. His voice sounded surprisingly cheerful and carefree. John, said the spouse indignantly, not sharing his joyful mood, I can't stay here long with the children. There are no facilities for a normal life here. Take us out of here and find another place to live. Please, I beg you very much. Agnes, dear, be patient for a while, the man pleaded in a soothing voice, I have a very difficult situation. I can't come right now. I'm sorry, I can't talk. I have to go. With those words, he quickly dropped the call so that he wouldn't have to hear a response from his wife. It was completely dark outside. Looking out the window, the woman didn't even see a single streetlight. It was pitch black. It was pitch black. Thanks to a neighbor, she managed to get some shelter for the night. She brought a blanket and clean linens, then quickly said goodbye. Their mother's mood had finally spread to Eva and Paul, and they had been cranky all evening. Agnes patiently rocked them one by one. As soon as the children calmed down, she collapsed exhausted on the uncomfortable bed next to her and cried into her pillow until late at night. Sad thoughts ran through her head. This was not how she had envisioned today. How would she cope alone with two small children away from the city and civilization? Would she have enough moral and physical strength? Would she be able to bear such a heavy load of responsibility? There was too much on her at once. Why? Why does life treat her so unfairly? Just this morning she was the happiest person in the world, and by night she is already crying over her cruel fate. The morning came with a new weight of problems. Again it is necessary to draw water and warm it directly in buckets. My God, how do people live in the village? Jane came in with a large mug of milk in her hands. Seeing the young mother's face swollen with tears, she forcibly brought her to the mirror and said in a stern tone, pointing at her reflection. Look what you have turned into. Wash your face and clean yourself up immediately. She pushed Agnes toward the sink and added, you need a distraction. Go to the store. Get me a packet of salt too. We don't have a city supermarket, but we have the basics. I'll babysit your kids, and you cook something to eat. You need to eat well. Agnes didn't argue, washed her face obediently and headed toward the main street where her neighbor had pointed her. The surrounding houses seemed friendlier today, not as lifeless as they had been yesterday. It turned out that John had put her on the very outskirts, and here, in the middle of the village, there were still many people. Children on bicycles whizzed past with laughter. Old men who met on the way said hello first, looking at the stranger with curiosity. The woman felt a little uncomfortable with the scrutiny, but when she saw the goodwill in their gazes, she calmed down. Let them look, what's the big deal? On the way back, Agnes decided to explore the area, walked around her yard, and realized that the forest was not far from here. The tall trees shook their thick crowns in a welcoming way, calling to her with a variety of flora. She would have to come closer next time. What a beauty! Now it was time to go back. What luck that she had been so lucky to have a neighbor. She was so grateful to her. She felt a little better after the walk, but by the end of the day her anxiety had returned and overpowered her other feelings. Agnes kept waiting for something. She waited that at any moment her husband would call or come and move them to more comfortable conditions. After all, she had asked him to do so yesterday. Would he leave her request unheeded? But John did not call. In the evening she couldn't stand it and dialed her husband's phone number. He did not answer for a long time, and then she heard his sharp, displeased voice. Well, and why are you calling? I told you, I'll call you myself. What's the matter there? No, nothing, replied the wife fearfully, extremely surprised at this unfriendly tone. I wanted to know how you were doing. We never got to talk last night. How long are we to stay here? Don't you understand at all? The husband became furious. I have things very serious here. I risk my life every day for my family. And you? As long as you have to, you'll live there. You'd better take care of the children. Agnes was completely confused. She had never heard such harsh words from her spouse. I'm sorry, she mumbled and ended the conversation. An unpleasant chill ran down her back. Well, okay. What if indeed something happened to her or the children? What then? She could only rely on herself and the good Jane. It was lucky she was a doctor. After these reflections she looked at her temporary home in a different way. Everything inside suddenly turned upside down, a realization and acceptance. Who knows how long they will have to live here? Her husband is in no hurry to take them away. Apparently, it is necessary to get used to new realities and adapt to unusual living conditions. For the children's sake, for my own sake, to survive. It's been 2 weeks, 2 long weeks. Time seemed to have slowed down here. The world around did not seem as horrible and hostile as it had at first. Gradually, life settled down. The special unhurried rhythm of life in the village was even pleasant. Daily cares became habitual. There were pluses of such life: clean air, clean water, silence. It was just the right thing for children. The babies gradually grew up and gained weight, and this could not but please the young mother. She was tormented and frightened only by the unknown about John. What is going on there? After that conversation on raised tones, the wife decided not to press her husband any more, and he is happy to deal with the same short formal calls, wondering only one thing: how are the children? Not a word about herself. How does she feel? What's on her mind? And as soon as his wife tried to ask him timid questions about his work and their future, he immediately stopped talking, citing the busyness. What if he has a bad job? Of course, it would not make her happy, but it would not be a disaster. During the last 2 weeks Agnes had realized that she could live in any conditions, so the loss of the bank did not scare her so much. If only John himself were alive and well. However, this unaccustomed indifference towards her disturbed her greatly. Jane did not share Agnes's anxiety about her husband. In response to her wondering aloud, she only pressed her lips together skeptically and shook her head. Oh, honey, if you don't understand anything yourself, what am I to say? Time will sort things out, she tactfully hinted at the obvious. Agnes guessed what Jane was talking about, but she pushed the horrible thoughts away from her as much as possible. No, John couldn't do that to her. Especially now, when they have a long-awaited addition to their family, 2 wonderful babies they've wanted and waited for years. No, He just worries about them, protects them from troubles and troubles. It's all right, Agnes will bear it. Then she will do everything possible and impossible to establish the former relationship with him. The days and weeks of life in the village passed in a leisurely succession. Thanks to Jane's kindness and favor, the young mother now walked around the village almost every day. Just this morning, a neighbor announced, "Agnes, take a walk while Paul and Eva are asleep. I'll stay with them." Recently, the young woman had grown fond of walking nearby, on the edge of the forest, among the bushes and various herbs. Here she felt especially good. The tangy smell of wildflowers, butterflies of the brightest colors, dragonflies, casting a metallic shine in the sun. The only sounds heard were the trills of birds hidden in the bushes and crowns of huge trees, and the light rustling of leaves. Yes, city dwellers are completely deprived of this pleasure. Many of them have already atrophied their senses. Once here, they wouldn't even notice this extraordinary beauty. But Agnes was still able to feel this extraordinary atmosphere, which gave her strength and impetus for life. Here all her cares and worries receded away, as if suddenly she had entered a completely different fairy tale world, where there was no sickness, no troubles. Only man and nature. Agnes fell into the tall silky grass and gazed upward for a long time at the marvelous picture painted by nature. A bright blue sky, framed by daisies and cornflowers, through which golden rays of sunlight broke through. It was a kind of therapy. Literally in half an hour all negative energy was removed. The body was enveloped by a wave of relaxation and bliss. There was complete harmony in the soul. Today it was especially hot, and the woman decided to walk closer to the forest, from where freshness and coolness were in the air. Suddenly, she stopped on the spot, noticing something large and dark in the grass. Cautiously she came closer and saw the body of a man. He was lying there without moving. His clothes were old, his hands and feet covered with mud and slime. It looked as if he had fallen out of some swamp. From the distance of a few steps it seemed that he was not breathing at all. Fear gripped the woman. Was he a dead man? As she cautiously approached and bent over him, she heard him moan hoarsely and painfully. "My God, he's alive. Thank God. Jane. She's a paramedic. We should call her for help right away." She rushed home and excitedly told her neighbor about her strange discovery. The two of them turned the stranger over and saw that he was quite young, not more than 30 years old. "He's covered with blood," remarked Jane. "We must have his wounds washed and bandaged at once." With great difficulty the two of them dragged the man to Agnes's house, which was nearer, and put him to bed. A neighbor brought a huge box from her house and stood over the wounded man for a long time. All night he tossed about in delirium, but toward morning he opened his eyes and looked around the room with a realized look of wonder. "Honey, you're awake," rejoiced the old woman, "and I was already doubting my qualifications as a doctor. How are you feeling? Are you dizzy?" "Where am I?" was all the stranger could utter. "In the village. Here, Agnes found you by the woods, and otherwise you might have died." The man looked at the young mother with the infant in her arms and inquired good-naturedly, "And who do you have? Is it a boy or a girl?" Agnes smiled and her eyes lit up with genuine happiness. "It's a girl, Eva. And over there in the crib is a boy, Paul," she answered proudly. "Wow, twins, that's great. Lucky you. I don't have kids." "What's your name, honey?" the neighbor asked. "Noah," he replied simply. And, anticipating the questioning, for some reason he decided to change the subject abruptly. As if he was afraid of something. "Can I have the phone? I need to make a call." He spoke some separate words and phrases into the phone. Or maybe they were ciphers. And in general, he was acting extremely suspicious. Could he be a bandit? Agnes was frightened, and shivers ran down her spine. "What if he's a murderer?" she continued. "There's a reason he was lying bloody in the woods and didn't call the police. Definitely a bandit. That's all we need." We had to bring a criminal into the house. An hour later 2 black cars pulled up in front of the house. 3 sturdy, shaven-headed young men burst into the room and with the words, "Noah, thank God you're alive," rushed to their comrade. Both women huddled in a corner in fright, clutching their children to them. Noticing this, Noah began to reassure them. "Don't be frightened, I'm an undercover cop. I'm sorry I didn't come clean right away. I'll come by soon and explain everything in detail." The new acquaintance did not deceive. 2 days later he arrived in the evening with 2 huge bouquets of roses and an impressive bag of gifts. He looked a little different. There was no trace of the overgrown, thickly stubbled tramp in old, worn clothes. He was clean-shaven and neatly trimmed. A clean shirt, smelling of a pleasant masculine cologne. Only a couple of fresh scars on his cheek and a medical bandage on his arm testified to the recent incident. The shining eyes were filled with immense gratitude. "Agnes, Jane, my dear saviors, I don't even know how to thank you," he exclaimed as he handed them the flowers. The women were embarrassed by such nice words, but both wanted to know what had really happened. How did the young policeman find himself on the brink of life and death? They sat in the kitchen drinking tea until late afternoon. Now Agnes knew almost everything about her new acquaintance. From early childhood Noah had a keen sense of injustice. In every situation, without the slightest doubt, he defended the weak. Initially, in the yard among the boys, then at school. At first, he himself often suffered from offenders, but when he started boxing in the sports section, no one else especially did not want to mess with him. The strong only respect strength. Already in the 6th grade he knew this for sure. His vocation, to work in the police, to catch criminals, to fight injustice. Turns out there are so many people out there who want to hurt others. Someone has to stand up for defenseless people. Someone must contribute to the triumph of law and truth. At work, he quickly gained the respect of his co-workers and a reputation as an incorruptible police officer. Although there were those who viewed him with skepticism. He fell in love and married right after graduation. His chosen one was a real beauty, a tall, slender, spectacular girl. Their romance was unusually bright and stormy, causing genuine envy of others. True, over time it became clear that the young wife, seeing the active position of her husband, hoping for his rapid career growth and a rich life. However, Noah did not strive to get a promotion, going through the documents in the office. He was focused on specific criminal cases. It was important for him to see the results of his work. It was important to realize that his efforts were not in vain and made life easier for ordinary citizens. Constant business trips and low salary did not contribute to the strengthening of the family bond. The wife sincerely wondered why her husband needed all this, because there was an opportunity to sit quietly in a soft, comfortable chair, and also to receive gratitude. Many are ready to pay well for the fact that they simply will not be noticed. For such explicit hints Noah was terribly angry at his wife. Their relationship was gradually deteriorating. Now he no longer wanted to rush home with a bouquet of flowers and a bottle of wine on his rare day off to arrange a romantic surprise for his favorite woman. More and more often he stayed late at work and took on the most dangerous cases. And now he was involved in another operation. 2 months infiltrated the Black Loggers, studying the scheme of a specific illegal business to take the whole gang at once, from customers to performers. And he almost succeeded. Exactly what he'd always feared had happened. One of the criminals he had encountered before recognized him and turned him in. Noah was severely punished and thrown half alive in a rippling part of the swamp, certain that he would drown. Nature had mercy on the man, unwilling to accept the wounded body into her drowning grounds. Miraculously the policeman managed to escape, or rather, to crawl away. With difficulty moving on weak legs and stopping at every tree for respite, he wandered through the forest for a long time. Then, when his strength began to fail him, he crawled among the trees and bushes, clinging to the thorny branches. How long this went on is not known. And when his body became exhausted and his consciousness blacked out from reality, Agnes found him. The young woman listened attentively to the policeman and never interrupted. Such a rare for our time selflessness and dedication to his work caused her sincere admiration. Agnes was generally close to such an attitude. After all, how much easier it would be to live if everyone obeyed the laws. Maybe not so rich, but peaceful and quiet. Only here, in the village, she began to realize how much unnecessary things are literally imposed on modern society. The forced unity with nature gave her a clear hint. Man had gone the wrong way in the development of civilization, creating more and more new devices to facilitate life, and in fact, for a prosperous existence you need not so much. It turned out that Noah shares her opinion. But the realities are such that it is impossible to abandon the established system of society and ignore what is going on around. Agnes, in her turn, shared her misfortune. She complained about the lawlessness of the raiders who oppress her husband. Having listened to her carefully, the policeman made a firm promise to find out everything possible for his savior as soon as possible. The lady was delighted. This handsome young man with a piercing look gave peace to her soul. Somehow it seemed that it was he who would help to solve all the problems. Since then Noah became a frequent guest in her house. He helped the woman in everything. Agnes gave him fragrant tea, which her neighbor taught her to brew. Over tea the young people talked. They found many common topics and could talk for hours. They parted with great regret, looking forward to meeting again. As promised, for 3 days now Noah had been discreetly following John, Agnes's husband. Now, however, he found himself in an extremely awkward position and had no idea what the right thing to do next was. From the first day it became clear, there were no raiders and criminals at all. The man lived quietly in his own pleasure, did not hide from anyone, ate in expensive restaurants, made purchases in stores. All the facts pointed to the fact that he had a mistress, which for some reason he carefully hides and meets with her secretly. Maybe he was afraid that Agnes would find out about her and want to file for divorce and sue him for the bank. In the short time Noah has been on the case, the woman has not been identified. And he didn't have an assignment. What difference does it make who she is? The important thing is that he now knows John is a real scoundrel. But now the man is faced with a serious moral dilemma, to tell the whole truth to this recently dear to him, or not. A difficult task to be solved in the shortest possible time. Emma lay in bed and looked at the peacefully sleeping man beside her. At this moment, she had a conflicting feeling for her lover. For 6 months now she had been successfully dating a real banker, generous and rich, also quite young and attractive. It's a favorable match, and there is no way to miss him, otherwise she will be a complete fool. During this time Emma has managed to fascinate the man and fall in love with her. Now he is even ready to marry her, but there is one problem. Finally get rid of his lawful wife, he did not dare. He waited until she gave birth to children, and now he is still waiting and waiting. He wants to divorce her and keep the kids. He even devised a foolish plan. He took them out to the village and waits for an opportunity to apply to the guardianship department and deprive his wife of her parental rights, on the grounds that she left home with the newborn babies of her own free will, depriving them of everything, and now she can't cope with them and lives in unacceptable conditions. But Emma has no use for other people's children. She doesn't really want her own yet either. At the thought of diapers, bottles and the eternal crying of a baby, she became uncomfortable, and then there are twins. No, that's not her story. And to be honest, she was tired of waiting. She'd already had one, who had returned to his wife at the last moment. Emma wouldn't make that mistake again. John opened his eyes and, stretching with a smile, asked, "Why are you looking at me like that, sweetheart?" "I just love you," she whispered and gave the man the most tender look she could muster. "That's why I admire you, even when you're asleep." She knew very well how to amuse a man's ego. Her lover, with a satisfied expression on his face, put his arms around her and began to kiss her. But Emma had other plans. She resolutely released herself from his embrace, figuring now was the best time to have a serious conversation. "John," she began in a different tone, "it's been almost a month. You promised you'd get things settled quickly and we'd get married. Or have you changed your mind?" "Why, my love," the man spoke affectionately, pulling the girl close to him, "everything will be all right. Come to me." But Emma jumped up abruptly from the bed and deliberately slowly began to dress, so that her lover might have a chance to get a good look at what he might be missing. "John, I'm sick of being your mistress," she stated sternly. "If you don't take me seriously, just like a pretty doll, then you won't see me again." She turned around and added a dramatic note to her voice, "After all, I love you very much and you're just playing me." "Okay," he said firmly, "if you want to go faster, I'm going to need your help." "I'll do anything for you," she mouthed affectionately. "I need you to go to the village on some made-up pretext. Say, for instance, that you are lost, and see how my wife lives in this wilderness. Perhaps the opportune moment has come." The mistress rejoiced. The suggestion was very welcome. A new plan instantly appeared in Emma's mind. After agonizing for several days, Noah finally put away the last of his doubts, and the decision was made. If it had been about any other person, he wouldn't have thought for a minute. But it was about Agnes. This amazing fragile woman who found herself in unfamiliar conditions with 2 newborn children. Despite the hardships, her heart remained compassionate and kind. She deserves the best. Yes, he must tell her everything. Today he would go to her and tell her everything, and then she would decide for herself. What if? No, you can't even think about that, because he's married. You can't do that. But he was so used to this short period of time to funny kids and to this wonderful woman, a real woman, intelligent, kind, calm, natural, without lies and selfishness. What a pity he had only met her now. But no. He can't be so unfair to his wife, because he himself has been declaring justice all his life. No, let things be as they are. He will simply do his duty and tell of the deception, and the distance between him and Agnes must immediately be made greater. To his great surprise, Noah noticed a cab at the wicket gate. Who could it be? What if her husband reformed at last and decided to take his spouse and children home? Noah would be glad if it were true. No, in this case he will not share information that will destroy the family. But what if John's remorse is genuine? He's willing to keep this secret for the well-being of Agnes and the babies. Voices came from the kitchen. The man opened his mouth to call out to the landlady and make his presence known, but suddenly he heard the voices of the guests. Yes, it was a woman. And that voice was very familiar. Yes, you got it right. John doesn't love you anymore, she said angrily. If you don't get away from him, it will be worse for you. Agnes's trembling voice came in reply. Who are you? What right have you to say such things to me? I am his favorite woman, the guest said aggressively, and you are now a nobody. Take your children and get out of here. The farther away the better. The hostess was silent for a moment, struggling with the surging emotion, and then answered in a calm voice. This is the first time I've seen you. I'd like to hear all of this from John. If it's true, of course. Go away at once. And then the woman changed tactics quite suddenly. I'm sorry, please, I didn't mean to offend you. Why don't you make us some tea? I'll tell you everything in detail. Let's have a friendly sit down. Noah froze in place, listening to the conversation. He realized everything. It was so disgusting and ugly that it was almost impossible to realize the reality of what was happening. To make sure that his conclusions were correct, he stealthily crept closer and peered through the ajar door into the kitchen. Agnes had her back turned at that moment, making tea, and the guest. The guest was sitting at the table. And yes, it was Emma, Noah's wife. For a moment the policeman thought his head was about to explode from the tension. But suddenly he noticed how his wife, unnoticed by the hostess, reached out her hand to a bucket of drinking water standing quite close by. In her hand there was a bag of some kind. There was no time to think. His professional reflex helped him to react instantly. The man jumped up to her and grabbed her arm with force. She cried out in fright and stared at her husband in amazement. What are you doing here? How did you find me?" Agnes turned around and was extremely surprised. "What is this?" Noah asked sharply, pressing Emma against the wall. "What's in this bag? Answer me now." She quickly came to her senses, and clenched her teeth and tried to break free. Fortunately, all her efforts were in vain. "Let go, Noah. You're hurting me," she wailed. "Tell me, now. What is this powder?" The husband spoke, oblivious to his spouse's manipulations. Realizing that they were no longer working on Noah, Emma stopped pretending and became herself again. "None of your business," she shouted in an angry voice. Out of helplessness, the woman became hysterical. She started spitting and biting. "I hate it. I hate you," she yelled exhaustedly. "You ruin everything for me all the time. You've ruined my whole life. I hate you." From the bedroom came the loud crying of children awakened by the noise. Agnes ran to them, leaving everything as it was, not even trying to make sense of this incomprehensible situation. The maternal instinct proved to be stronger. Noah had to handcuff Emma to calm her down and call the police. The police officer's suspicions were confirmed. In a short time, experts were able to determine that the powder Emma was trying to put in the drinking water was nothing but a potent, tasteless and odorless poison. If Noah hadn't happened to be on the scene, things could have ended very tragically. But where she'd gotten the drug remained to be investigated. Emma lied, hysterical, and blamed John for everything, trying to prove that she was not involved in the attempted poisoning. The banker was also arrested until the circumstances were clarified. Noah was disgusted to see such ugly behavior of his wife and to realize that the woman he once loved and trusted for many years, turned out to be capable of murder. Was it really all about money? For the sake of papers with which she can buy herself new dresses, phone and car? Were material possessions more precious than humanity? No, it had to be divorced, and as soon as possible. Now Agnes realized it too. Having completely abandoned her illusions, she too filed for divorce. She managed to get a share in the business from her ex-husband, which she immediately sold profitably to the co-owners of the bank, leaving herself a few shares. Now she and the children were secured for many years to come. All that remained was to decide where to live with the children. Her mother invited her to go abroad, closer to herself, but Agnes suddenly became so accustomed to rural life that she decided to stay there. A place where her soul felt complete peace. A place where Agnes realized exactly what she needed to be happy. A place where she literally found herself. Noah no longer hid his feelings and soon they were married. Within a year, they had another son. And without any IVF. These are the miracles of life. Despite the rich life, the man remained to work as an ordinary policeman, fighting evil in the name of justice. After all, the main thing in life is to understand your destiny and follow it, despite the obstacles, not paying attention to the opinions of others, no matter what, staying true to yourself. To yourself. To yourself. To yourself. To yourself. To yourself.